toss that to Ashima. Ashima, would you agree? I mean, if you looked at the disruption in the GST and some hangover of the demon problems as well, are we really in a position to take advantage of this surplus credit right away? Or do you think we will have to wait a couple of quarters?
No, I think we will have to wait. It is true that the sentiments are very positive, but market sentiments were always, the stock markets were always doing well. But we've had, private investment has been low, domestic demand has been low, credit growth has been low. And if you talk to bankers, then the constraint is not really the supply of funds. They are holding excess SLR just now. The constraint is really a lack of demand for funds. And you won't see that turning around that quickly. But that said, there are a number of factors that suggest that demand will also pick up, because consumption had received a temporary negative shock from demonetization and GST, which maybe is behind us now. And the world growth is looking up. That should be favorable for export growth.
Samiran, before we come to that part, is growth evident for you in the second and the third quarter itself, or third quarter for that matter, because now banks should be able to lend right away?
I don't see an acceleration in this quarter just because of the plan being announced. Having said that, I think the way I am looking at it is that is there a problem of demand for credit versus a problem of supply of credit? And we never knew the answer. Now we'll come to know the answer, because at least one part of the puzzle, which is the supply of credit, at least that part is going to be taken care of through this recapitalization plan. And since the private sector banks' credit growth was much higher than the public sector banks before this announcement, one can presume that there was some latent demand which these private sector banks were servicing. So now if the public sector banks, because of better capital, comes in there, then it could affect credit growth.
Do you think, Samiran, the government could say that we are giving you all this capital and we want you to concentrate on MSMEs or SMEs? If they did that, could this be counterproductive? I mean, more bad loans? Because I don't think the PSUs as yet have the data or the analytics capability.
So at this moment, it's tough to say whether this will be some kind of a tied scheme or not. But it's also true that MSMEs are a big driver of the economy, and if you look at the credit growth to this segment, that has been quite weak in the recent past.
Do PSUs have the wherewithal?
Idea to try to stem that.
No, but would PSUs have the wherewithal to sift and give credit to the right guy on the right parameters? I know some of the NBFCs have developed some bit of a database on it, but public sector banks for the last several years have become wholesale even in their liabilities, and they had to be weaned away from it. So do you think if they are directed, would that be a good idea?
We have to kind of keep in mind that recapitalization is not a solution to all the problems of public sector banks.
Okay.
It does not necessarily increase the efficiency of the public sector banks in any way. So, but at the same time, it's also true that if you take out the last few years, for a pretty long period, we were funding MSMEs through public sector banks only.
Okay.
So that model can come back into play if it is done properly.
Okay. Just your growth numbers, Samiran, before I go to Ashima. What are you expecting this year in terms of GVA?
So we were looking at around a 7% GVA number for the full year, which I know is a little bit on the higher side, because we think that last year's Q3, Q4 numbers would probably be revised down, and that would give a nice base effect for this year's Q3, Q4 to be seen as much higher.
Okay. Ashima, I wanted to ask you another question. Actually, on this, if this recap were to come the way it is, 2.11 lakh crore, it is quite possible that at least 1 lakh crore is going to be growth capital. Now, in the hands of banks, it actually gets a multiple of 10. So, we are staring at a fairly sharp rise in credit if indeed it is put to use, I mean, are we doing too much too soon? Should the RBI have to keep a hawk eye on inflation next year?
No, well, I think that the government's push, for example, is on the supply side, infrastructure, etc. So, there are other reforms on agriculture which are keeping food prices, good monsoon, etc., moderate. Yes, the rise in prices has also been moderate, the procurement prices. So, as long as all these factors play out, I think we are seeing that prices have been low for a long time now. But somehow we don't want to believe this. So the RBI, for example, is convinced that it will rise. I'm not so clear that it will. I think many of our price indices have been revised downwards, for example. So there are a lot of things happening there we're not even measuring properly.
Okay.
So it should be kind of data-driven. RBI's past few inflation forecasts have all been biased upwards. So I don't think we should be so quick to assume that inflation will rise, and we should wait to see if it does. And as long as food inflation is contained, I think we will be okay.
And
but one point I had about these public sector banks and this huge amount of credit which they can potentially lend, you know, they have been really bitten by this last episode.
Yes.
You know, once bitten, twice shy. And they are just trying to clone private sector banks now. They are searching for retail lending. They don't want to lend to firms. But our problem is that credit to firms is absolutely, you know,
essential.
very low rates of growth. And you cannot grow without that. So, and at the same time, various reforms have been undertaken, improvements in governance, and I don't think anybody is going to tell them to lend without proper evaluation.
Okay. What's the GVA number you will work with?
I think 6.5, rising to 7 by the end of the year.
Okay.
But at present, it's not going to be that high. But, you know, another positive factor I see is that a lot of, you know, the RBI has been worried about transmission of interest rates. Now, they were not cutting loan rates because of the risk built in from NPAs.
Yes.
Already, there's been talk of reducing loan rates, which will be a positive for
Yes,
demand
certainly.
for credit.
Certainly, yeah. There would be greater competition now that the banks will be emboldened to lend, and that might push up growth. Well, we have to take a very quick break and come to the other part of the question, governance reforms in public sector banks. Has the money come too easily? That question after this break.